Today, we're diving into the incredibly powerful story of Saint Gertrude the Great's final months. She was a 13th century mystic, and her story is, wow, just a profound look at faith, at suffering, and a kind of love that goes way beyond the physical world. So let's just start with a question. Imagine for a second if you suddenly couldn't speak to the people you care about most. How would you show them you love them? This exact challenge, well, that's what defined the very last chapter of St. Gertrude's life. So this is Gertrude, a woman known for her deep spiritual writings and her devotion. But in her final months, a really severe illness hit her hard. We're told one of her limbs was completely useless. Another was so sensitive that you couldn't even touch it without causing her agony. And most dramatically of all, it took away her ability to speak. So let's start there, with the profound silence that fell over her and how losing her voice became such a central part of her final trial. And this wasn't just for a day or two. The sources tell us she was basically mute for months. I mean, think about it. A woman whose entire life was built on prayer and community was suddenly silenced. The sisters who were caring for her, they really struggled to understand her because they just couldn't form the words.
Except for two words. Out of this total silence, the only phrase she could manage to say was "my spirit." It was actually so strange, so remarkable, that the sisters thought it was kind of a miracle that she could even pronounce this one simple phrase, given that her ability to speak was just gone.
And the context here is absolutely crucial. My spirit wasn't just random, it was a deliberate offering, and it echoes the words of Compline, which is the final prayer of the monastic day. It was like, in her last possible verbal act before being totally overwhelmed by pain, she was offering her very spirit to God. So how in the world did she keep leading and loving her community without her voice? Well, that brings us right to our next section, faith beyond words. And this is the amazing part. Her physical limits, they didn't diminish her spirit one bit. Actually, her love and her care for her sisters, who she saw as her spiritual children, it just got deeper. She had to find new, powerful ways to communicate that affection. Her actions, they became their own language. She would use what little strength she had left just to show she was happy her sisters were there. She'd use her only words, "my spirit," as a personal comfort for each one of them. She would reach out her hand to caress them, an act of love that we're told caused her immense pain. And as they left her side, she'd raise that same suffering hand to give them a final blessing. Every single gesture was proof of a mother's love that didn't need any words. But you can imagine, seeing this intense suffering, it raised a lot of questions for the people who were there. And that leads to a real turning point in the story, a divine promise. I mean, it's the question we'd all ask, right? Why would someone who had dedicated her entire life to God have to go through such an agonizing end? The sisters themselves wondered about this, and, according to the account, they actually got a divine answer. The story goes that about a month after she lost her speech, as the sisters were getting ready for the last rites, Gertrude had a vision. In it, our Lord appeared to her in a form of exceeding beauty, moving toward her like he was inviting her to himself. And in this vision, the reason for her trial was finally revealed. Her suffering wasn't for nothing. The patience she was being forced to show, it was a way for her to, in a way, participate in the memory of Christ's own suffering on the cross. Her pain was being transformed from just a physical thing into a profound spiritual act of union. And on top of that, a huge reward was promised. Her merit, you can think of it as her spiritual worthiness, it would be made equal to that of martyrs who literally shed their blood for their faith. But, and this is a big but, because she had lived such a long life, always growing in virtue, her heavenly glory would be even greater. Her whole faithful life had basically compounded her heavenly reward. And all of this brings us to the very end of her life and her reception into paradise. So on the day she died, the vision came back. Our Lord appeared, this time with his mother, the disciple John, and a whole host of saints. And as the story of the Passion was being read out loud by her bed, the figure of Christ in her vision actually bowed his head at the moment of his death on the cross. And then, something really amazing happened. The people in the room, they heard the sound of what they described as celestial spirits singing an invitation to paradise. "Come, O Lady, the joys of heaven await thee." And surrounded by this heavenly music, St. Gertrude's earthly suffering finally ended and her spirit was released. So, we end up right back where we started. The story of St. Gertrude's final days is this incredible narrative about suffering and endurance. It really suggests that even when the body fails and your voice is silenced, faith can provide a language all its own, a language of love, of patience, and ultimately, of triumph.
It kind of leaves you wondering, what is the real connection between our deepest beliefs and our ability to face life's toughest trials?